Chair. It's a very interesting conversation today, and I thank the witnesses for being here with us today. The bill is important in terms of ensuring Quebec and other provinces don't lose representation in the House of Commons, given the reality that Quebec's unique history, culture, language, and role in Confederation. Is the government contemplating changes that would also protect Quebec's share of seats in the House of Commons?
Madam Chair, through you, Ms. Blaney, thank you for the question. No, we're not contemplating other changes other than what's proposed in Bill C-14 to maintain Quebec's 78 seats, as was the case in the previous Parliament. We have no plans to go further in terms of the representation and in different provinces, but we're also conscious, as I said in my opening comments, of the work that the commissions are doing and the importance of allowing the commissions to have as much certainty as possible in terms of what number of seats they'll be dividing up per province. So we're conscious that doing that at this particular moment doesn't allow them to fulfill their legislative responsibilities in a way that we think would be respectful.
Thank you for that, Madam Chair, through you. The next question that I have is around the reality that the format that we're talking about is very colonial, and that we have a long-standing history here in Canada of colonialism and extinguishing often the voices of Indigenous communities. We know that some other countries have explored expanding their processes, their electoral processes, to make sure that the voices of Indigenous communities are heard. We also know statistically, if you look at elections that happen within communities, Indigenous communities, the voter turnout is extremely high, but we don't see that reflected, of course, in the other elections that happen in our country. So I'm just wondering, is there any discussion at this point about how we can amplify the voices of Indigenous communities, if there is any sort of goal towards having representation in both places in this Parliament to amplify those voices and make sure that those voices are represented? You know, I look at New Zealand for a specific example. We know that that's incredibly important, and if we're going to talk about reconciliation in a meaningful way, it has to happen in all levels. And of course, having those voices represented here, the first voices of this country, would, I think, make a more wholesome and collaborative process. So I'm just wondering, is there any work being done on that and exploring that and looking at systems that are working in other countries and how they may work in Canada?
Madam Chair, Ms. Blaney, I think correctly identifies a challenge that all of us need to reflect on. She mentioned both places, the House of Commons, obviously, and our friends in the other chamber in the Senate. We have tried through the Senate appointment process to appoint a number of Indigenous persons to the Senate. I think they have, talking to my colleagues in the Senate, they have contributed enormously to the conversations and to the work of that legislative chamber, but we can always do more. Ms. Blaney correctly identified other jurisdictions. New Zealand, you're absolutely right, is in many ways a leader in this domain. Some provinces have in Canada, and I'm going by memory, some provinces have, in the case of Indigenous persons or even other minority groups, I'm thinking of the Francophone communities in Nova Scotia, have decided deliberately in their legislature to ensure that the electoral map reflects a way that those voices, as Ms. Blaney properly said, that are often not adequately heard or are not easily heard in a typical electoral redistribution cycle. So we have no plans, no legislation in that regard at the moment. But I take note that the Chief Electoral Officer, I was in the Cabinet meeting this morning, but released a report or his recommendations on a number of elements of the two previous general elections. And obviously, Madam Chair, if this committee or other committees of the House had ideas or wanted to pursue that, then we would be interested in those conversations, but I don't want to pretend that we have legislation pending or cabinet decisions around anything in that regard at this moment. As I say, we're conscious that we're at the front end of an electoral boundaries redistribution process, so we want to, out of respect for the legislated timelines in that process, not widen the conversation to a point where the electoral boundaries commissions won't be able to do their work. But perhaps following that process, if colleagues wanted to bring those kind of issues before, we would be more than happy to work with colleagues, because we do recognize exactly the challenge that Ms. Blaney properly pointed out.
That is all my questions today. Thank you, Madam Chair.